Hi, thanks for joining today.
Yeah, no problem.
Um, these are meant to be super informal, so nothing crazy. Just want to give a profile, I guess, to any of the students that are subscribed, just as a profile for a potential career, since there's so many in our field.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. Well, why don't we start by you introducing yourself and say what you do?
Sure. Now, is this going to be a mass where they come in, or like are there people watching, or is this going to be recorded and uploaded?
It'll be recorded and uploaded.
Okay. I am the geomorphology practice lead at Aquafor Beech Ltd. I'm responsible for looking into mostly fluvial and inland lake and coastal projects that affect primarily erosion hazards and natural hazards associated with flooding or erosion. And we kind of do everything from acquiring land for people and telling them how far they can develop on it to telling municipalities what infrastructure they have in the creek is at risk and provide insights into any kind of associated hazard that pertains to that creek, or if we need to design it, we provide design information or criteria if someone's trying to rebuild a creek or redesign a creek or realign it, and what it should ultimately look like if it was a purely natural system.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah.
A little bit of everything is
Yeah.
the job description, I suppose. I guess the natural next question is what got you into this type of career in the first place?
Accident. I'd completed my degree in Earth and Environmental Science from McMaster, and I was all set to start a postdoc with Husky, and then COVID hit. So we had to kind of slow play my onboarding with Husky, and it kind of got delayed and delayed and delayed. And then all of a sudden, I'm 3 months down the road, and I still haven't got onboarded. And I decided, well, you know what? I probably have to look around for another job because I have absolutely no idea how long this is going to take. Little did we know we were going to be shut down for the better part of a year. So in that time, I was teaching at U of T, sedimentology and stratigraphy there, and I saw a posting for a geomorphologist at a company. I put my resume in, kind of highlighted all of the things that they were looking for a fluvial geomorphologist, and I was trying to highlight all of those things that in my own research that pertain to fluvial rivers and streams and water courses. And kind of make that parallel. I was trying to draw that line for my employer to say, oh yeah, this guy has done, tons of science on rivers and streams and water bodies. And in reality, I've never gotten wet. In any of my research, I have never gotten wet because all of my rivers and streams and water bodies that I did research on were in ancient rocks. So they were hundreds of millions of years old. There was no water left. It was all the remnants, the deposits, and the sediment that was left behind by these rivers. But I had an understanding of what a certain scale of river could leave in the rock record. So that makes you start to understand, analogs or things in modern geography that leave behind these types of deposits so that you can kind of recreate the original environment in sedimentary rock as a concept. But you have to know all these things. But I'd never worked in a creek or a river before I got hired on, but I knew the science and the process behind it. So I made those connections and how I'd published in, articles about rivers and about fluvial systems and they bought it. So I was able to convince them that, even though I did not have a degree in geomorphology, my PhD in earth and environmental science was directly applicable because of the stuff I had worked in and worked with.
Yeah, I think that's been a theme throughout the other chats that I've done over time is
Mm,
that everyone kind of fell into the field that they ended up
yeah.
in, and that so many skills that you acquire in other scientific fields are directly applicable and cross-applicable between a lot of different things, especially fluvial geomorphology, since it is kind of a mixed bag of four or
It's a
five
niche.
different
It's a
disciplines.
yeah, it's definitely a niche discipline. But I guess the takeaway would be if you're looking for a job and to start a career, I would suggest don't expect the person hiring or the manager hiring to make the connections for you or
Mm.
even for themselves. You've got to make the connections for them and explain how the experience you have is directly 100% related and not even related, but the most important part about whatever you're applying for.
Yeah, for sure. Especially with so many applicants and people starting to get into the environmental field, it's
Mhm.
definitely more difficult now for recruiters, especially to make that distinguishment themselves between hundreds of applications. So yeah, that's really great advice. I guess
And
I'm,
recruiters aren't going to do it for you. I mean, the hiring
no.
managers will need to be convinced, but recruiters will absolutely not do that for you. If a recruiter has been put in charge to find a fluvial sedimentologist, you need
Yeah.
to have a degree in fluvial sedimentology for them to go, they might be appropriate.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. I think that there was a time where cover letters kind of went by the wayside for a while there, and they're making a resurgence, and I think that that's really great because that's a
And
really
they're
interesting.
so important. Cover letters are possibly the most important part of your resume. And I can't even tell you how many times I get resumes without cover letters on them, and I have to ask for cover letters.
Yeah.
And especially if you've gotten a master's degree or even an honors science degree, that honors designation or that master's designation means there's been a writing component to my degree. So
Mhm.
not only can I do science, but I can talk and communicate science. And if you can talk and communicate science and ideas, that is sometimes more valuable than just a bunch of credits. Because we no longer ask for transcripts. So A
Mhm.
students are in the same category as D students, quite frankly, as long as you have the credit in the 50, you got the course, so you got the degree. But if you have communication skills and can set forth a well-written, no typos, well formatted and appealing looking cover letter that makes sense from top to bottom, then you're worth my time to take an
Absolutely.
hour out of my very busy schedule to sit with you and talk with you for that time and see if you go on. So I would always suggest not only writing a cover letter, but looking at the cover letter as the most, yes, tedious, but important part of your application.
Absolutely. And especially tailoring those cover letters and not just using
Oh
the
yeah.
same generic one, which is exhausting, but definitely worth it when you're applying for things that you really care about.
Mhm.
I think maybe that's where the misconception about why is university required for a lot of positions like this, or at least
Right.
highly recommended, is that writing component. You get so much writing experience in university that you may not get as much in college, and that's who's going to write your reports is going to be the people who have experience with that.
That's right. That's
With
right.
that being said, it's not always necessary. A master's is also
Mhm.
not necessary for some people. There are people on my current team right now who don't, but they have more experience than me, and so they're still field lead in the field.
Yep.
And so it all just depends on what you're going for and where you're starting.
Mhm.
Um, Something that I was interested in learning is more about some projects that you've been really interested in or that were your favorites so far in your experience in your current position. If you're
Well,
able to talk about any of them.
of course, of course. And it's actually because I'm in consulting, so that means that we're not given work to sit and do. We are always looking for work. So, um, as a matter of course, the most interesting project always has to be and is invariable the project you're going for. And so
Mm,
those are always those projects that you're constantly bidding on. And you really have to think like that because otherwise, you keep drifting back and going, oh, well, it wasn't as good as this project, or, it was so much better on that one. And so everything you end up doing or go about to do and your next week's work, becomes a chore. Whereas for me, I'm always looking at the next project, looking at the next thing that I'm going to be, exploring. And that was part of why I got a PhD instead of staying at a master's, personally, was so that I could be in a job. I don't get paid any more than a master's. That never makes or breaks your paycheck. But going into higher graduate studies is going to be something that allows you to choose what you're thinking about or the type of job you do. It's
mm,
from a financial perspective, it's never going to pay itself back. Those extra 4 years you stay out of the the workplace and or do stuff, but you do get to work on usually more interesting projects. So my next few projects are going to be involving ice and river ice. And this is some of the cool stuff, even though, 90% of my work is fluvial. So looking at rivers and river hazards and erosion hazards. Another, I would say 9% is coastal. So we do have a few coastal projects on the go now. And that 1% that, we get to think about new things that we haven't thought about, and those would include climate change projects. Here's what the climate's going to be, but what does that actually mean about rates of erosion? Like, how do you upscale what's eroding now to what's eroding in the future? We all know it's going to be more intensive, more, it's going to be more rainfall events. There's going to be more rain. There's going to be more rain and more dry. It's going to be, more intensive rainfalls less frequently or something like that. But then kind of going down the nuts and bolts of that and saying, well, what does that actually translate for me? Can I
mm,
still build my shed in my backyard? The answer is yes. It just might not be in the same location. Does that mean I have less developable, I own less developable land if I back onto a creek? The answer there is yes. But where does that new line draw, and and
mm,
and and is that important? I mean, those are the questions that we actually get to go after. So my latest project that I haven't officially started, but I'm starting to start, if that makes sense, is an ice study and looking at the effects of river ice, not the flooding effects of ice jams and things like that, but the actual effects of when a river freezes over and then it melts and it forms a big ice block, and those ice blocks get piled on top of each other. How does that affect what we're trying to build along creeks? And can we quantify it? Can we come up with a line that says, here's your hazard line for ice? So if you're going to build something in this hazard line, it has to be able to withstand the push of ice. Well, how much ice would be pushing on that? We're anywhere from one block of ice. What's a block of ice? How thick is that block of ice? Is there a relationship between, thin blocks of ice stacked up and how high they can stack, and big thick blocks of ice and how you can, Tetris those up? And looking at all these things, or at least beginning to ask those questions, is going to be really important as our climate does change, because what we thought was the normal, and quite frequently, we look at ice as looking at marks on trees. And we know if there's no marks on trees here, then the ice hasn't scraped up against those trees. And okay, so that's really good proxy data. Whereas we're understanding that it's not, you know, beavers with a trowel going around and marking up, high up on trees. We understand that's ice when we see those little nicks and that ice damage that we can recognize. So are those marks going to move? And if they do move, do they have implications for things like how high we put our manholes? things like how far back we set our outfall head walls, things like, do I build a bike rack on a path in the park? Or do my bike racks now have to be set beyond the ice limit? Because the trail will be fine, but you'll be if you get ice piling up on the banks every year, well, you'll be dealing with mangled bike racks. Now, if you're putting in 3 or 4 bike racks, that's not a big deal. But if you think of that in a city like Toronto and saying Toronto wide, we've got to move our bike racks back because those things will just be mangled. And replacing 60,000 bike racks is a pretty big ticket item on the city's budget. So things like that are what municipalities come to us and ask us these big questions, and can we solve them?
That sounds super interesting. I
Yeah.
am wondering whether the research that you're doing for that, whether the intent is to then incorporate it into our standard way of doing monitoring or channel design or things like that, or whether this is a very regionally specific project.
All of these questions are very specific to sites. Every site is kind of different. Conservation authorities will always ask about their primary when you're looking to do something within a regulated area, and we consider a creek corridor a regulated area. That means that there's a body, in this case, the Conservation Authority in Hamilton. I believe it's the Hamilton Conservation, or Hamilton Wentworth Conservation. I think it's Hamilton Conservation that regulates within a certain distance of a creek or a storm pond or a lake. And they have this buffer that goes around there. Now, that doesn't mean there's a hazard through there or there's something dangerous through there. It just means if you're going to do anything through here, you've got to come to us and ask us for a permit. So we go to these permitting agencies and they're interested in a few things. They're interested primarily in flooding. So, how much water gets displaced. If you're going to try and build your house within a regulated area, which includes a floodplain, it's just like I talk to my kids every time they have a bath and try and get as many tub toys in that bath as possible. I'm like, okay, but then we have to put the tub toys in first before we put the water in. Because if we fill it halfway up and then you start to put as many tub toys as you want in there, plus that displaces water and it spills it all out. And so we have to think about these things and say, look, you can build a house in a floodplain, but you have to dig out somewhere around that property so that we balance out how much water is displaced. Because if we don't, your neighbor downstream is going to get that water. That's where that displaced water is going to be. And that's not fair because when they had their property, they had certain limits and they have the right to not have their house, be underwater because you needed to build 12 shell, things, or in the case of my kids, have an entire inflatable in that bathtub with you. So we have to be conscious that flooding is a major concern for them. Another concern is going to be the natural hazard of erosion. And so we understand that rivers and creeks and even lakes have a certain erosion associated with their banks, and that erosion is in the realm of possibility. We don't actually know how far something's going to erode, and we don't know when. But we do know that of all of the rivers and creeks in the world that we're aware of, they have a certain maximum erosion potential. It is not likely that on a river that is going to erode a kilometer to the side in the matter of a year. That's ridiculous. That would be absolutely tremendous. Even Niagara Falls doesn't recede that quickly, but we do know how fast Niagara Falls is receding, or widening, or the Niagara River is moving around, and it's an amazingly powerful river. And if it can't do it, well, then I don't need to provide that much room. But exactly how much room do I need, to provide? And that's kind of the purpose of the Conservation Authority. So, with those, where did I start on this? I had a point in the beginning. Where did we start?
I had started out by asking you whether this was regionally specific research or whether you
Yeah,
think that it would be applied in the standard procedure for any.
right. So things like erosion and flooding are what the conservation authorities are primarily involved with. They used to look at species and more of the ecological and natural heritage of an area, but those have been downloaded to cities, but we still have to satisfy those things. Things like climate change erosion studies, like, okay, so we're protecting for erosion in the next 100 years, but is that erosion based on the last 100 years, or is it based on the next 100 years? And the next 100 years has climate change to think about, where the last 100 years was not directly affected by climate change, or should I say, as affected. And
I,
so, and
yeah,
so looking forward, we understand that some places or jurisdictions or jobs want the climate change assessment in there, and some want the ice. What are the effects of ice? But like I said, if you're not putting any bike racks or trail railings or things that could be susceptible to ice, then do you really need an ice study? Probably not. Probably not. If you get some ice, or maybe there's not too much ice in there in the first place, but larger water courses like the Credit River in Mississauga or the Humber River in Toronto, or maybe the Grand River going through some of those municipalities, maybe they really do need to think about how much ice is building up. And so you kind of tailor that to the requirements, and the requirements are based on, what has traditionally been a problem there and what they reasonably expect to be a problem in the future.
for sure. I think further to your point about landowners before, when you were saying it wasn't fair to downstream residents to be affected by upstream residents to an extent. I think that's captured in our field assessments typically because we'll do the immediate study area and then we'll do a certain amount of 100 meters before or after the study area to see what the cumulative effects are there. So I
Mhm.
think that component is a lot more important than I think people realize because they designate a study area and they go, well, this is the only affected zone that we're looking at. And it's like, well, that's not true because there's a confluence directly upstream, which is directly affecting your study area. And then there's 400 landowners downstream, which are also going to be affected by whatever you're doing in this study area. So it's a very holistic science to research and study rivers and then alter them eventually. And I think that that ice consideration is really interesting. And I think more discussion about that would be interesting on an industry level to see whether a threshold would be deemed for certain rivers for that to be a necessary part of assessment for sure.
That's right. You do need to be, typically, these are more important in areas that are confined systems. So things that are in a valley. So the ice has literally nowhere else to go.
Yeah.
So these valley confined systems are very sensitive to it. Unconfined systems that just kind of go out everywhere that aren't entrenched in the valley. However, most of Ontario water courses are in some way in a valley just because of the glacial history during the last glacial maximum. We've got a lot of glacially carved streams and valley confinements. So, it probably is of bigger importance, and should at least be looked at as a risk factor moving forward because of the change in climate. So whereas before we'd understand the effects of river ice, and we'd kind of intuitively stayed away from them or understood, people take their docks out. You know what I mean? Like if you have a cottage and there's, bad ice there, you don't build permanent docks, you take docks out, but typically those are also lakes and river areas that are heavily controlled, so the water level goes up and down. So you just naturally know when to take your dock out, and you live with that. And I guess the point here is climate change is going to throw a monkey wrench into a lot of these schedules, and places where people didn't have to take their docks out are probably going to have to, and other places where people always had to take their docks out, might not be a big deal anymore. So, there's opportunities there to change what people have to do because that dock removal constitutes a very big expense and inconvenience to some people. Champagne problems, I know. If you've got a cottage and a dock to take out, you're doing okay.
They're problems nonetheless, though, and
Mm.
I think that they have stacking effects. Like it's a dock, but why does it impact the dock, and what else is it impacting in addition to that dock?
Hmm.
So the dock may not seem important, but the greater picture of why it's being affected is definitely important. And I think that's what this research aims to do, that this field of research aims to do, is to provide that bigger picture while being very specific for certain sites, but
Hmm.
extrapolating that to be like, hey, well, if you applied that to the whole river, what would that look like? And I think that's what's the most interesting thing. And they're so different. Every river is so different, and even different reaches within rivers are so different. So it may be interesting to know for one section, but for the other, like you said, it may be totally open and it doesn't matter. So I think that's my shameless plug for people to get into this field because it's very cool and it changes all the time for sure.
Hmm.
Uh, were there, well, the answer is yes, but projects that you felt became more tricky than you thought that they were? I was interested to hear maybe an example of something like that. Like what common issues tend to arise when you're doing field work or historical assessments or anything relating to rivers in our field?
Um, there's been some, and typically it's because well, two reasons: either something you don't know, um, it always throws a monkey wrench in. For instance, um, uh, uh, we've done an erosion hazard assessment for a municipality that wanted to build a parking lot that was very close to, or wanted to expand a parking lot that was super close to a river in and so I'm trying not to say the municipality, and I'm not trying to say the
I
river, so
know
I'm doing my
it's
best.
tricky for sure.
So, we went out there and we saw, all the erosion in the area, saw how close they wanted to build this, and we said, wow, there's a lot of erosion going on here. I know it kind of doesn't look too bad, but in the world of what's possible top to tail in this channel, you guys are building your thing way too close. And not only that, but you've put you've put your infrastructure super close to this creek as well. Is that a manhole? What is that manhole connecting? Why is there a manhole there? And so we'd look at the manhole and we go, can we look at the drawings that we were given and we said, hey, there's something missing. There's two manholes on either side of right beside this bend, but we don't know what's in there. Lo and behold, it's a sanitary sewer that's a 1.6 meter in diameter sanitary sewer that is less than 2 meters away from the cut bank that is actively eroding in between the channel and the parking lot. And so we say, well, the good news is you can build your parking lot, with it to within 4 meters of that creek because that sanitary sewer is going to keep that creek away. The bad news is the river is going to undercut your big sanitary sewer, and you are going to have a poop creek in about 3 to 4 years. So we've got another project to happen here. So the project was immediately put on hold. They said, no, 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 okay, we don't do anything. We've got to send this back to another department to put up erosion control. It's the lack of information is typically something that throws a monkey wrench in and can make just a very simple, just tell us where we can build our parking lot. Just give us a line. We don't care where it is. We'll build it right up to there. Tell us where we can do it. And I go, okay, guys, but you don't understand. You're picking out wall paint colors when the house is on fire. Put the house out fire out first, and we'll paint the whole house nice as new. And sometimes you've got to have those conversations with project managers who are like, "Give me a break. I didn't hire you guys to tell us what's going wrong with our sewers. Just tell us where to build. I've got to get this parking lot built. Just tell us where to build." I'm like, forget the parking lot. You got a really bad problem here that's going to cost you a lot of money that you got to deal with. And part of being a PGO, a professional geoscientist of Ontario, is understanding when there are larger things at stake that it's okay to make the client a little upset because it is your duty to protect the public and your client, protect your very client from something that they don't see as a problem. That's a problem. We're supposed to understand what a problem and identify a problem, be able to now we get I'm coming right full circle back to that letter, that cover letter on your resume. We're supposed to be able to very concisely, very respectfully explain what the issue is. Whether that issue is you're about to lose a major sewer system and create a complete emergency repair work required, and perhaps an environmental problem, uh, or if that is, your company really needs me, and here's why. And being able to very concisely and accurately and respectfully convey that information in a very, very short amount of time.
Yeah, I think that's a great driver home point is communication is always the most important skill you can have in any profession, but especially when it comes to science and
Yep.
things that directly or indirectly until they directly impact people's lives. It's not just river science, it's
Mhm.
an entire neighborhood or an entire city or water is the backbone of any area that it's in, and it's going to do whatever it wants, regardless of what you want it to do. It may
That's right.
take 50 years for it to blow out in that corner that you don't want it to, or it may take 5, but it's gonna. And so, yeah, I think that responsibility is really important. And I appreciate that you brought up the PGO because that's something that's a really important designation if somebody's interested in pursuing this field, because you're the one getting to say these things to the client and to sign off on drawings and saying what makes sense for these types of projects. So that's a
Mhm.
good plug for for that certification for
Well,
sure.
it's more than just drawings, right? So if there's a QA QC review of a project, sometimes municipalities will request, anyone can request, but it's more
Mhm.
often in municipalities that they request a QA QC and they ask for someone with a designation to sign and seal that review. You often have to, even if it's just a report, be able to do the final review of a report.
Mhm.
And it takes a couple hours to look top to bottom through the report and say, yes, I have confirmed everything in here is factual, is correct, and I've checked it for quality assurance. And that time that it takes, if that can only go to one or two people in your company, because you only have one or two people who are licensed engineers or licensed geoscientists, then that really adds up for them. They're not actually doing project management or doing design themselves. They're just reading other people's work all day.
Mhm.
When you think that has to be done for every single report, and sometimes there's 3 and 4 reports per project, that that can take up quite a bit of time. And to give everybody an idea, I am actively involved, as is most people in my team, in somewhere between 40 or 100 projects at any one time, depending on, especially being a geomorphologist. There's not many of us in the company. For a company of about 75 permanent staff and another 25 contract or co-op staff, there's only 3 of us. And of those, only 2 of us are a PGO. One's about to get her PGO, but there's not a lot that I can actually review geomorphic sections.
Is that Tanisha who's going to get hers?
Oh, I shouldn't speak for hers, but yes, we do have Tanisha who's also a Mac grad. Yeah,
Oh, I meant for the person you mentioned that's about to get her PTO. I thought you meant Tanisha.
I did.
Oh, yay. Oh, that's so exciting. Sorry, off topic. But yeah, yeah, it's more than just a credential after your name for sure. It's a responsibility. We were just
Mhm.
chatting about that. Roger, in our meeting, Roger Phillips, the other day brought it up and how important it is. And especially to designate what you've reviewed. If you haven't reviewed the whole thing, if you're only responsible for reviewing certain parts of it, then to specify that in a contributor
Mhm.
table or things of that nature to be like, this is what I will say yes to. I may not
Yep.
have looked at this, and that's important. And some clients want you to look at the whole thing, and others are fine that because you're a fluvial geomorphologist, you don't need to look at the ecology section as much because it's not as much your responsibility, right? And so
Well, and you shouldn't be signing off on things that are not in your
for
in
sure,
your capability.
for sure.
For instance, hydraulic modeling is not something that I should be reviewing, unless I intimately understood how that model was put together. Typically, you'll have someone review the modeling section. You'll have another review the geomorph. You'll have another review the ecology part of it, and that'll encompass most of the technical phases.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, for sure. It's a lot easier with smaller projects where you're just a
Mhm.
sub consultant for only the fluvial geo portion,
Mhm.
then that's a lot easier to distinguish. But yeah, on those bigger projects, it's definitely necessary to distinguish who looked at what and why they did and their experience and what that means and if they say yes or no. Because there are some reports where we do research and the conclusion isn't really what the client wanted, but we have to say this is just how it is and this is what we recommend and sorry but you can't do that as much as
And
you looking for this report to be an approval for that subdivision it just doesn't make sense and
and
um
that's often some another problem that we do run into is people are looking for guarantees before the work
mm,
is done. Um, Consulting and uh, uh, environmental engineering, environmental geoscience, it is something that is getting more is more and more required and for agency approval for you to be legally allowed to do things. And often people don't understand the reason for the expense because it's not cheap. We're talking about, even the simplest report is thousands of dollars. And that's if you're a private homeowner that wants to buy a property and tear the whole property down and build your dream house, now you're also wondering, well, why would I have to spend $15,000 for you to look at the backyard and tell me how close I can build to the edge? My neighbor's built to the edge already. Why do I have to do that?
yeah
And can you, in your experience, can you say whether this is most likely to be a favorable outcome? And I often have to say something very kind, but to the same effect as this analogy that you can't sit there and ask someone before you put that needle in me, can you tell me what the results of my blood test will be?
yeah
No, no, I can't. Well, what can you tell me? Well, I can probably tell you you're gonna die sometime between now and your 200th birthday. Sometime in there, you're probably gonna go. But that's all I can tell you before I stick this needle in. But the needle's gonna hurt. Yes, it is. But the opposite of not knowing the results of this is gonna hurt more. Um, so you kind of, if this is what you want to do, you're gonna have to do this, and you're gonna have to do this by a qualified person who can actually sign off on that. Those people don't work for free.
yeah yeah and it takes a long time to be able to get your
Yep.
designation you need a lot of experience and you need the education and you need a fundamental understanding of what you're doing to be able to sign off on these things and that all takes time it's the same thing as lawyers people wonder why lawyers are good lawyers are so expensive and it's because they have that experience and that education and that understanding of what they're
Well,
doing
and there's nothing simple. There's no such thing as a simple
no
answer, not in the legal profession or not in the science profession. I can't just walk out to your backyard and go, "Yeah, it's good." Yes, that would be probably a couple $100. And it pays for my gas and gets me there and gets me back. And what, a couple hours of writing? Yeah, it's good, but that's not what goes into it. There's hours and hours of reviewing, getting a topo survey, drawing those things up in AutoCAD, getting that back, analyzing it, make sure the angle's right, make sure the distances are right, looking at, what the creek is actually eroding, and then coming at something that will pass review and supported enough with enough evidence. And it's more than just, and here we're going to transition into the next topic, which needs to be addressed by early career scientists. And the sooner you can get out of this habit, the better. But it needs to be more, whatever science, it needs to be more than information vomit. So
Mhm.
I'm gonna define information vomit. Information vomit is when you go out into the field as a young geoscientist and you collect everything. Just like this is an A grade report, you're going to collect everything down to the minutia of the grain sizes you see on this part of the bank versus this part of the bank. You're going to get high resolution this. You're going to develop maps that are perfect and collect so much data, and then you're going to take all of that data and all of that information that you've collected, just pages and pages of information and tables and maps and figures, and you're going to go blah. Here it is. That is information vomit. And that is what you can't do if you're going to get higher up into your career. You very quickly got to develop that skill of skimming through the vomit to that important stuff, the so what, and the very specific proof for it. Everything else is just noise. It's all well collected data. It's all top notch professional data collection. But until you can rise from that level up to what's in, and distill it down to what of it is important, that is going to be the difference in your career between junior intermediate levels and senior levels. Senior levels are able to see the big picture and pull out what's going to be the defining argument. You're going to be able to be a reviewer and say, did they come at the right conclusions? Did they support those conclusions enough? And now you're able to review those things. So swimming through all of that information, deciding what of it is important, what of it is, okay, information that supports, but it's not the conclusion, right? Being able to write that conclusion, that's what's going to get your papers published. That's what's going to get you to move up in careers. That's what's going to get you the job, is that we can see the potential in you, that we won't hire you into this job and you'll just information vomit at me. You'll actually go through, support everything in the report, but then say at the end, here's the end result, and here's what I looked at, here is what is important, and be able to uh, uh, communicate that in a way that not only can I understand it, but I also believe it.
Yeah, that narrative is super important. And when I say narrative, I don't mean spinning a story that'll make your client happy or the one that's most convenient based on your data. The
Right.
narrative of what is actually happening and what could happen and what has happened in the past, regardless of how anybody feels about it.
Mhm.
Telling that narrative is super important. The data is important for sure,
That
but
is
most of
important.
it's thrown in an appendix, and then you pick out the things that actually matter and you say, okay, based on these, this is what I think. And then based on what I think, here's my recommendations. And based on those
Sure.
recommendations, here's your next steps for what you should do after that. And that's the most important part is being able to translate that narrative, especially to people who may not understand what it is that we do or what bankful is or why certain sediment sizes matter. There are some people for your client that get your report that have no idea really why you got that data or what that means. So that's why that's so important, because somebody who makes decisions needs to be able to look at it and be like, oh, okay, I understand why
And it's
that's
a hard thing to do because often, like I said, anywhere between 40 and 100 projects at any given time. There are times of the year that you're involved in so many, you can't even remember what's important and what the narrative is. So it is important to take a step back, and typically in early careers, you're going to be dealing with just data. No one's gonna need you to pull that narrative out or pull that bigger picture out. You'll be told what that bigger picture is.
Mm.
But to move up, you need to kind of see through what the end goal is, what a good result is, and be able to look for what's important within your research or your study or the work that you're doing and kind of drive that home.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's why that not so much requirement, but kind of unofficial requirement of having a master's degree for this type of field is so
Mhm.
preferential for a lot of places because that shows that you have not only collected data, that you've also in what it's saying to you.
Mhm.
And yeah, that's really important. I appreciate
And
that full circle moment coming right back to that point
and
from
the last thing which we haven't talked about is the time value of science.
mm,
And that's my euphemistic way of discussing budgets. And
mm,
and
fun
when
stuff.
you're at school, you're a student, you're expected to fail at things and then succeed at the end and hand the paper in, and spin your wheels and not really know what you're doing and then figure it out. And that is part of the journey. And you're expected to do that. But when you get into industry, you don't have time for those. You don't have budget for that. No one is investing in you in that way. They expect that a task is going to be done. If you have questions about that task, you'll ask those questions, and be able to get right back to doing it correctly the first time. Now there is a learning curve, and there is some time put into people where we, bring you up to speed, and yes, but ultimately, there's very few people in a company that have the time to just explore. That's what I get to do. That's what, some others get to do, but there's not a lot of people that get to do that on an everyday basis. Sometimes they'll give you a pet project or they'll give you a small task to say, hey, figure out how to do this. But we're talking about a couple of days, not like months to figure something out.
For sure.
And which is what everybody that goes to university is used to having the months or at least weeks to figure out a problem.
Mm.
We just don't have budgets to play with things for weeks. You kind of have to get to that. And so there's an element of science that has to be understood and mastered very quickly, especially in consulting, because all we get to do is stick to the budget. There's a certain amount of time to do something. Every minute that we take to do something above that time comes out of the company's profits. And there's going to be a certain point at which even that runs out. And they're like, Dave, are you really sure that, this is the right job for you? You're taking a lot of time to just get this simple thing done. Yes, but it could be done better, and it could be so, sometimes you just have to get down to doing the job at hand and not the job that you think should be done, all things being perfect. So, for example, sometimes you'll get criteria that you have to go and investigate, and you'll find something out there and say, "Well, this hasn't been considered." Okay, but that is out of scope. So we often in a project, we will come back to what is in scope and what is out of scope. And it's perfectly fine to say, I'm going to tell you what I studied. Here is the scope at what I looked at. This is what I found within that scope. You're allowed to write about the other things you found, but you do need to mention that this was out of scope, so I'm not able to comment on that.
Yeah,
And
that
and
recommendation
that's
is
that's a
important.
that's a hard thing for people coming out of university to deal with or to handle because they're used to being able to explore everything that their mind can think of. And that's
Mhm.
a great thing. But now the new skill is to say, okay, but I got to put a box around that and focus on what the scope is. Otherwise, you'll run out of budget and you won't be very, uh, you know, consulting is a business and you won't be able to conduct that business because it becomes far too indulgent.
Yeah, for sure. I think that leads really well into the kind of tandem version of experience that I think makes the most sense is the school plus the actual hands-on experience, like
Mhm.
doing a co-op somewhere or an internship or like a paid internship, or like some sort of hands-on experience where you're getting out there and you're getting to see how this actually works so that when you do get into a full-time job in this field someday, then you already understand like, okay, well, if we're going to do a site this big, it'll probably take us 4 hours in the field. But if we do a site this big, it'll probably take us 8. Ideally, we'd have 10, but we only have budget for 7. So what can we squeeze in that time? Can we do another site while we're there to make the budget
Mhm.
stretch more? And all these things that you only get by doing it. We can talk about it until we're blue in the face, but until you've been out there and you've gotten the call to be like, Kate, you guys need to come back, like you have what you have, or
Yep.
whatever, then you don't truly get that. And I appreciate that you brought that up for sure. But it is a business. Consulting is a usually a tight budget business unless you get really lucky with a very large project and a lot of things go your way. And I'm thankful for scope changes when we can get them, but that's not super common, especially for smaller scopes where the city was like,
Mhm.
well, you said you could. Why didn't you?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a great point to bring up. Thanks for touching on that.
So with graduate school, I mean, McMaster's pretty good because my experience there is if you have something you really want to pursue, you can usually go and talk to your supervisor about it, and your supervisor will typically go, well, okay, but I have enough money to do this, but not this. I've got this much money. So sometimes your supervisor will allow you into that world, into that thinking, and involve you in that budget process. But for the most part, um, there's not a lot of opportunity for that. But if you do get that opportunity, I do encourage you to, play within a budget and get the science you can get done within that budget and see how much every little bit you can squeeze out of that.
For
But I
sure.
I do agree the co-op while you're going and this is I do believe things could be improved with certain universities in that undergrads can go and do co-op positions, but
Yeah.
graduate students do not have that ability because either any money you make as a co-op gets taken from your funding, so, why would you do that if it, means you can't TA that semester? Or if you do get involved in something with your supervisor, the university takes some money off the top, and takes some kind of fee for doing that, which now a company like ours has to either pay you way less for doing the exact same thing that an undergrad is getting paid to do. They're paying you less money for your contemporaries, or we're paying 1.5 times what your contemporaries are doing, so we wouldn't hire you because it's too expensive.
Yeah.
Again, we go back to the budget. So I hope the universities really start to rethink their graduate students and their ability to do co-op programs, because you're right. If you are, especially in earth and environmental science, if you are thinking of going into earth and environmental science, the majority of students go on to consulting companies.
Yeah.
And that consulting company is a business and has to work efficiently. And
Yeah.
when it's 30% cheaper to hire an undergrad to do the same job, they're going to hire that undergrad instead of allowing that graduate student the very important job, or that important experience of interning with a company that once you're out will most likely hire you and give you a job coming right out of grad school.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's where college has a bit of a leg up
They
from
do.
that standpoint.
Absolutely, they do.
When I went to Niagara, the whole thing is practical, and we had a bunch of projects, and included in that was a year long with an actual company or
Yeah.
organization. You end up producing a deliverable for these people, and you make those connections. The connections are the most important thing. Your education is cool, but who you know and what experience you have tends to usually be the bottom line for a lot of people between hiring somebody versus somebody else. For a fair portion, if you have two
That
people
that
with the same
absolutely makes
degree,
a difference. Absolutely, it does. But I
yeah,
mean,
because you're
that
taking
all is also different as per the discipline. I mean, quite frankly,
for
there's not a
sure.
lot of geomorphologists out there coming out of schools and graduate programs or otherwise.
For sure. For
Not
sure.
as every environmental consulting company that deals works anywhere near water needs to either have a fluvial geomorphologist on staff, or they need to get a sub-consultant. They need to sub it out to someone, because every permit requires that if you're anywhere in near that regulated area.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's really important. And there's not enough of us. I don't feel like there's not enough of us. Everyone keeps moving around to different places, but it's the same number of people.
That's
So
right.
yeah, definitely we definitely need more people in our field for sure. Well, we are nearing the amount of time I told you that it would take for this conversation. So was there anything else you wanted to add before we go?
No, no. Thank you very much for having me in. And this was a nice format. Like I kind of said at the beginning, I'm kind of used to having questions anytime, or allowing someone else to talk while I'm thinking about how to answer a question or something. But this was fun, and I hope this is useful for whoever is going to download and watch it.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure it will be. The other ones that I had done before got really good reception, especially from students, because people in our field don't really do this kind of thing unless it's at conferences.
Mhm.
And it takes a little bit of money to get to conferences and some time to travel and stuff. And so not everyone's able to go. So I appreciate you joining and making this accessible for those who may not be able to go to those types of things. And thank you. And I hope
Well,
you have
you're
a
very
great rest
welcome.
of your
Oh,
day. It
speaking
was
of
great to connect.
conferences, TRCA, CBC, and LSRCA are hosting the Source to Stream conference coming up very shortly. So you can go on to Source to Stream if you look at that. Aquafor will be giving a talk either day. Rob has one day and Chris has the other. They're the two president and CEO of the company. And I believe, I'm not quite sure yet. Let me check my email. But I've put in an abstract to talk at the CRIPE conference on river ice, PPP, professional, something, something. Anyway, it's in no Newfoundland. That I'll be talking about river ice at the for the Credit River, and an ice control structure that we're looking at rehabilitating there at Arundel Park. But I'll be giving that talk. But if you are interested in river ice, the acronym is CRIPE, CRIPE, and I think if you go to like cripe.com, you'll get that consortium. There's a very small knit group of scientists doing work on river ice. And Source to Stream is, of course, everything to do with restoration and naturalization, a lot of environmental concerns and environmental consulting, especially, and the concerns of the conservation authorities that we deal with. And that conference will be coming up. If you can't attend that as a student, which there are student memberships to go, you can always download the proceedings and find out what was talked about.
For sure. And there is a networking only pass as well, which is significantly less expensive too. So even just being able to show
Mhm.
up and just meet a few of the people that are in this field could definitely be valuable as well. So lots of options. Thanks for that plug. I forgot that that was coming up so soon.
That's
February's
right.
been flying by.
I'll be
So
there on the second day, and if you're watching this and want to introduce yourself, please come find me.
David Kynaston, everybody.
There you go.
Well, thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. It was great to catch up.
You too. Thanks, Shelby. Bye
All
now.
right, bye. Take care.